In the Kingdom of Netherlands there are two types of land, one that was water and one that is sand. The cities of old were built in a ring, and placing agriculture inside was a logical thing. Then, a long time ago, in 1916, water comes on and floods the ravine. "We need more land," they shouted in glee. "Why don't we just reclaim the sea?" New polders came with land galore, and suddenly they have built even more. The good life is surely a Dutch concept. It was constructed here, and it consists of urban, rural, natural, industrial, and other landscapes. The precise structure of the country allows for uninhibited development of its component parts. The land flourishes, and so does its architecture. Dutch visual culture is accessible and relatable to all. Everything here is designed, but in a way that is simple, clear, understandable, and often very feasible. If good design is something that is also affordable, then it will be used by everyone. The visual culture in the Netherlands is a mass culture. It is accessible to everyone. Throughout history, the thing that differentiated Dutch art from the rest of the world is the fact that it was portrayed as realistic. It was a constructed view of the world. Vermeer's, Van Eyck's, and others' paintings depicted everything as it was. Dutch art of this period was done for the people, and not for specific patrons. It was made and sold on markets. Simple and accessible. Realism and the market. A flat tale is an exploration of the Dutch visual culture through architecture as a primary lens of discovery. It consists out of three component parts which were created to form a whole but can also be viewed as separate elements. The three parts represent three levels of complexity of architectural representation, as well as three levels of development and maturation of architectural narratives. As a conclusion, operations performed in all three parts of the project are compiled and collated in a final appendix. It explains the intentions and interrelations of the drawings and stories, positioning them in their context and the architectural discourse. A flat tale is based on a foreigner's investigation of the Netherlands, Dutch architectural projects and narratives, and the ways in which they are most often represented to the public and to the architectural community. To establish the basic grammar of the Netherlands and its architecture, the first part, A Good Life ABC, is used as an example of the simplest way of giving and receiving knowledge. It is an analogy to the way architecture is represented to the public. With the intention to make projects easier to understand, which consequently allows them to be better accepted by the general population, architects sometimes oversimplify. In an effort to explain the complex architectural idea in a relatable way, a series of diagrams is produced. This process ends with a simplified reductive drawing that represents the final stage of development, an icon, which then becomes the means of recognition for the project. A Good Life ABC uses the letters of the alphabet, which are paired with drawings of objects and elements of the built environment. The drawings are drawn in a reductive manner, with minimal detailing and with the use of only primary colors. This is done in order to remove any specificity of a singular object. In this way, emblematic objects and places are created which refer only to themselves and their Dutchness. They perform as symbols of Dutch identity. The last one, Almere, has to be seen. It is said to be very conceptually clean. The quarters in it were built over time, and the visual difference in them was prime. The housing was first built in a ring, to make polder life a wonderful thing. Later they changed it back to a grid, and tried to correct the mistake that they did. The houses won't have their identities lost, even with the low final building cost. So what if not all were made out of brick? You just needed to pick a facade that would stick. They saved the center to be built last, so it wouldn't get eaten by the tooth of the past. OMA came and passed the test. Now they just needed to invite the rest. As architects, we often create more stories than buildings. All globally successful and famous Dutch architectural projects have one thing in common. They are all based on successful and relatable narratives. The simple yet creative and intelligent story is what differentiates the Dutch project from the majority of others. The architects use terms, images, words, and experiences that are relatable to everyone. The story is aimed for the end user and the architectural theoretician or critic. At the height of its production, Dutch architecture has come to the point where the main criterion for a project's success is its compelling concept, which in turn manifests itself through the architectural story. The project questions the capacity of architectural storytelling, which is exactly the topic that should be discussed in this story-based environment. After establishing the grammar with the Good Life ABC, a flat tail forms the syntax. It is presented in the form of a picture book, which uses illustrations to give image to the events of the corresponding fabula. Image is used as a conveyor of spatial narrative, while text is used to convey the temporal one. Since words and pictures necessarily have a combative relationship, their complementarity is a matter of opposites complementing each other by virtue of their differences. As a result, the relationship between pictures and text in picture books tend to be ironic. Each speaks about the matter on which the other is silent. A flat tail is an analogy for the architectural project, which correspondingly also consists out of images and text, where both are used to convey a message. They can also, like in the picture book, correspond with each other or not. If we consider the original users of each format, the child for the picture book and the investor or stakeholder for the architectural project, we can also conclude that, in both cases, the users need a pre-required set of skills that enables them to read and comprehend the materials. The encoding of these elementary structures of signification, through which a work achieves meaning and life as a narrative, is analyzed in the terms of the reader-viewer's creation of a possible world, conceived as a construct from individual experience, upon which disbelief is suspended. Both the architectural design project and the picture book require a certain removal from the given reality in order to be able to use one's imagination and comprehend, acknowledge, and visualize or imagine the ideas presented in the format. The story depicted in A Flat Tale is centered around the development of Almere, the newest city on the youngest Dutch polder. Almere was created on the Flevoland polder, an artificial piece of land created by reclaiming the IJsselmeer in the 1960s. It has been an architectural testing ground since the beginning of its creation. The city is divided into housing quarters, which have been built in stages. It plans to expand due to rapid growth in population. From large areas of housing developments, which are emblematic examples of urban planning approaches, to the master plan for Almere Centrum, which was created by OMA in 1997, and public buildings constructed there by other famous Dutch architectural offices, Almere has it all. It is a dense conglomeration of architectural experiments and approaches. The narrative of Almere can be viewed as a shorter, dense version of Dutch architectural history, which is fruitful for the creation of imagery related to a variety of different aspects of Dutch architectural production. In A Flat Tale, Almere is used as a lens for presenting and observing architectural, urban, and infrastructural approaches. It is also used to establish ideas that form generative theoretical elements of Dutch architecture and culture, such as concept, export, good life, welfare, subsidies, and others. They pitched their ideas, or so it would seem, and presented their perfect architectural dream. No buildings were necessary to stand out from the rest. You just needed to pass a conceptual test. When visitors came, they could sigh in relief, because they were finally able to suspend disbelief. The welfare state has shortly strengthened its reign, which made the architects go insane. The ministry supported the architectural trade. Everybody could apply, and they weren't afraid. The institute would publish and promote them all, but it all culminated in one big brawl. Now, to survive and compete on the scene, they have to export the grand Dutch dream. The buildings will surely bring them fame, even though behind the facades they're all the same. Considered to be a land of architectural opportunities, the Netherlands promotes contemporary architecture as an export product. The concepts and architectural stories are the foundation for the development of the architectural profession. The possibility to realize theoretical and conceptual architectural investigations has created a recognizable image for the Netherlands. To the rest of the world, a lot of the projects built here are considered almost impossible, but not out of technical or financial impossibilities. The issue is a creative one. There is a creative freedom present here that is impossible in some other countries. Creative freedom in architecture is accepted and valued by the government and acknowledged by its citizens. Factors outside of architecture do not restrain it in a way that it affects the image of the finished product. This freedom perhaps exists due to a lack of liability for architects, or it has to do with the country's long-lasting history of a can-do attitude. A favorable financial situation also allows for things that are maybe not possible in other places. If the project is not accepted in its first iteration, then it is siphoned through the polder model until everyone has agreed upon the best way of proceeding, which in the end leaves everybody at least a bit satisfied. Today's model is leaning more towards a realist utopia. Anything you can imagine is possible, but only if it works. And in order for it to work, you have to convince a lot of people that it is possible. To do that, you have to have a good story that wins over favors and settles fears and anxieties about possible deficiency of the project. The architectural profession has slowly started to recover after the recent economic crisis. But now, instead of a collective aim to produce more and more new architectural projects, the focus is turning on adapting and reusing the multitude of empty spaces that exist throughout the country. Coincidentally, it can be said that the building of these now largely empty buildings is what caused the economic problems in the first place. The architects now return to the scene of the crime and begin to rethink their approaches. Innovation is now geared towards adaptation and reuse. So what are then the spatial, structural, and visual qualities architecture needs to have in order to facilitate this necessity for change? The third part of the project, Pitch, is a collection of architectural texts. It represents the most mature phase of developing an architectural idea. It uses architectural polemic through the format of an architectural journal. The format of the journal is usually, with no exception, reserved for architects. When writing about architecture, architects tend to use a vocabulary full of overly complicated semantic constructs that allude to a complex, deep, and overly intellectual creative process. But the Dutch stories are often different. Pitch examines these architectural stories. It groups diagrams, original project pitches, topic descriptions, and architectural prescriptions to form retroactive architectural recipes. Today, the story has become the essential part of the project. In some instances, the narratives have become so good that they even outdo the quality of the actual design. What then constitutes an architectural project beside the story itself? Can an architectural project still remain accessible, relatable, and understandable to the end user or to the architectural community without using some of its basic tools of representation? The point is not to generate the formula for the perfect architectural project, the set items to win all competitions and tenders, but rather to rethink what are the actual representational elements and tools the architects today need in order to present their project. In the Kingdom of Netherlands, everything you touch, they say, must by rule be inherently Dutch. They constructed a good life in land under sea, with building regulations that were uncommonly free. And in the end, the biggest trick is that not all is made out of brick. By using the research and analysis approaches taken from folktale researchers Propp and Todorov, I have transposed the structural elements of tales onto different approaches to architectural narrative. By approaching the topic of architectural representation through both its lexical and visual qualities, I have distilled three main categories: the diagram and the emblematic object, the architectural design project and its narrative, and the architectural essay. To relate all three parts of the project and position them in the Dutch architectural discourse, a reference unreferenced forms the project's appendix. It contains references, sources, inspirations, and explanations to all three project elements. The appendix draws from the research done on the topics of Dutch architecture and visual culture, the history, meaning, and structure of tales and narratives, and the approaches, elements, meanings, structures, and formats of picture books. Starting with the Good Life ABC, the appendix goes into each letter of the alphabet and the drawing associated with it, giving it a short historical, theoretical, or visual explanation of the objects and their relation to Dutch culture and the built environment. The second part of the appendix elaborates on the drawings in a flat tale. Every opening has its own story. Every drawing is described and positioned within historical and architectural context. References used for the drawings are enumerated and explained in detail. The third part of the appendix elaborates on the final project found in pitch. It explains the use of infiltrators throughout the three parts and locates them within the previous books. By illuminating the stories behind the infiltrated elements, the drawings of A Good Life ABC and The Flat Tale are given a deeper meaning, which can be explored by re-examining the entire set. By viewing the Netherlands as a realist utopia, different project possibilities present themselves. The Netherlands is a country which was for a large part physically built by reclaiming the sea. But since most of it is reclaimed land, most of it is flat, or at least not very high above the sea level. The only way one can observe the order and organization of the perfect straight lines of canals, streets, and train tracks that cut the orthogonal agricultural fields is from an airplane. The highest geographic point of the country equals the height of an average skyscraper. The only thing missing in the Dutch scenery is a strong verticality. This project ends with a fictional conclusion, an interpretation of the same material, but through the words of an architectural project. The project is a grand, utopian, infrastructural, urban, and architectural project of a mountain in the Netherlands. Using only text, diagrams, and allusions to the mountain, which are placed as infiltrators throughout the elements of the project, I question and test the capacity of architectural storytelling. Combined, the project represents the symbols, a depiction, a reflection, and the story of the construct of the good life in the Netherlands.